Scorpio, something powerful has just happened in the spiritual realm, and though you weren't in the room, the conversation was about you. A sacred council has gathered, and when it ended, someone walked away in tears. September reveals the truth they could no longer deny. The light you carry is too radiant to ignore. What if I told you that a spiritual door opened the moment you pressed play? That this message found its way to you not by chance, not by mistake, but because your soul aligned with a divine moment that's unfolding right now? If you're still here, it's because you're meant to be. You're not just a viewer. You're part of something much greater, an awakening, a reckoning, and a restoration. This video isn't just information. It's confirmation. A message from the divine realm that the battle you've been fighting quietly, inwardly, is being seen and responded to. A spiritual meeting just ended, Scorpio. In a realm beyond time, beyond sight, your name was spoken with purpose. It wasn't a meeting of blame or punishment, it was a declaration of truth. The pain you've carried in silence, the resilience no one applauded, the light you've guarded while walking through shadows. It has all been witnessed. Someone who once misunderstood you, minimized you, or misjudged you left that gathering in tears. Not because you hurt them, but because the truth finally stood without needing to shout. And now, you're here. Breathing. Listening. Ready. Not by accident. On Miracle of the Sign, this is where spirit meets self. This is where we don't just talk about zodiac signs, we walk with them, through shadow and light, through healing and divine timing. Today's message blends ancient wisdom, celestial alignment, and the still voice of God that whispers when the world gets loud. Scorpio, I know you've questioned your worth in rooms that couldn't hold your truth. I know you've swallowed your voice to avoid being misunderstood. I know you've endured long seasons where silence felt safer than expression. But this September, the universe is shifting. And you are no longer required to shrink to be safe. The message for you is simple: you have already been seen. Already been chosen. And now, it's your turn to rise, not in noise, not in vengeance, but in divine alignment with who you really are. This space is a spiritual sanctuary. Every like, every comment, every subscription is more than an engagement matrix, it's a sacred agreement between your soul and your future. I want to thank you truly for being here. Your presence is the reason this message was born. And trust me, beloved Scorpio, you will want to stay with me until the very end. Because what the divine is about to reveal to you this month changes everything. So let me ask you, what led you here today? What synchronicity brought your soul to this message, at this exact time? If you feel the resonance in your spirit, I invite you to confirm it. Comment below, I am ready to receive what is mine. Let this be your declaration. Let this be your door. Now, let's begin. Scorpio, what if I told you that beyond what your eyes can see, a sacred conversation has just taken place, a gathering not bound by time or space, where the currency of communication is energy, and truth does not need to be spoken aloud to be understood? You were not there in body, but your soul was called by name. This wasn't a trial. It wasn't an accusation. It was something far more profound, a council of light called not to judge you, but to confirm you. Your name, your energy, your endurance seat was spoken with reverence, because what you have lived through, what you've carried, and how you've kept your light alive in the darkest places. It matters. It's been seen. In the spiritual landscape, there are moments when a soul's unseen battles rise to the surface of divine attention. This was one of those moments. The council made up of ancestors who walk beside you, of spiritual forces aligned with your destiny, of universal intelligence that knows no boundaries came together to acknowledge that you have not been overlooked, forgotten, or lost in the crowd. You have been rising in silence. You have been burning a steady flame where others would have gone cold. And it was time that this was known. Someone left that meeting in tears not because of anything you did, but because the truth finally met them where they could no longer deny it. Sometimes, those who underestimated you, abandoned you, or dismissed your light are not moved by punishment but by revelation. There is a kind of grief that comes when someone realizes the weight of what they failed to recognize while it was in front of them. And this grief doesn't scream, it weeps. It humbles. It repents without words. That's what happened. Not vengeance, but the quiet power of the truth finally revealing itself. In numerology, September aligns with the number 9, a number of endings, completion, and karmic closure. It's the number of sacred cycles fulfilled and doors softly closing so others may open. For you, Scorpio, this month carries the vibration of divine resolution. That sacred council, that spiritual meeting, was the final stamp on a long chapter of your life that needed no more striving, no more explanation. It was as if the universe leaned in and said, "It's finished. You've done enough. Now let the light carry the rest." The power in this is that it wasn't born from action, it was born from presence. You didn't have to fight. You didn't have to prove. All you had to do was continue being who you are. And that, Scorpio, was more than enough. This idea that we are seen even when we are silent is one echoed in the deepest wells of spiritual understanding. In seasons when we retreat, when we are misunderstood or invisible to others, it is easy to believe that our worth disappears with our voice. But the truth is that your light does not fade when it is quiet. It deepens. It gathers wisdom. And when the time is right, it is witnessed by those who have eyes to see it, not with judgment, but with awe. You are not here today by accident. If your heart feels heavy, if you've been wondering whether the pain you've endured had any meaning, this is your answer. The acknowledgement has already happened in the realm of spirit. You don't have to beg to be seen. You already have been. And for those who walked away from your light, only to realize what it meant after it was gone, this is their reckoning. Not yours. Yours is the restoration. So take a breath, Scorpio. You've crossed a threshold. And on the other side is not a battle, but a blessing. Something in the heavens has shifted in your favor, and your only task now is to receive. Scorpio, there was a time when you believed that truth spoken from the heart, raw and unfiltered, would be enough. You believed that if you could just put your pain into words, if you could offer your vulnerability without armor, the people around you would meet you there with gentleness, with empathy, with love. But what you found instead was silence. Or worse, dismissal. You saw the subtle shifts, the tightening of a jaw, the eyes darting away, the uncomfortable pause followed by a change of subject. Perhaps you even heard the casual remarks that cut deeper than anyone realized. You're too sensitive. You're making a big deal out of nothing. You should be over that by now. These weren't just words. They were erasures. And what they erased was something sacred: your lived experience, your emotional truth, your soul's cry for connection. And so you did what so many deeply feeling, deeply aware souls do: you went quiet. But let's be clear about one thing: your silence was never weakness. It was wisdom. In the language of energy, not all healing is loud. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-preservation is to close the door before the storm walks in. Scorpio, you didn't hide because you were afraid. You stepped back because you could see what others refused to face: that your pain wasn't performative, and it didn't exist for their comfort. You learned how to guard your own soul like sacred ground, because it is. This is where so many of your emotional patterns were shaped, not by your own flaws, but by your environment's inability to hold space for your truth. And when that happens over and over, the body remembers. The nervous system contracts. The voice retreats. You start rehearsing every word before you speak it. You weigh your emotions like currency, measuring how much you can afford to express before it costs you connection. That's not drama. That's trauma management. But here's the shift I want you to recognize: your silence kept your essence intact. You didn't lose yourself in needing to be seen. You chose to protect what wasn't yet ready to be shared with those who couldn't hold it. That's powerful. That's sacred. That's survival as a form of spiritual strength. And now, you've reached a place in your journey where the silence no longer feels like safety, it feels like limitation. You're being called, not to explain yourself again to those who still can't listen, but to write a new story where your voice doesn't need permission to exist. You are being asked to reclaim the narrative. Not for them. For you. This is where the healing deepens. One practice I recommend is emotional journaling, not just documenting events, but rewriting them with compassion. Take the version of you who was silenced and speak to them with the voice you've grown into. Tell them, you weren't too much. They just weren't enough. This isn't about assigning blame. It's about returning dignity to the places where it was stripped away. Scorpio, healing isn't about pretending the past didn't hurt. It's about refusing to carry its shame into your future. You've been misunderstood, yes, but you were never broken. You were never weak. You were never meant to be palatable to people who don't know how to hold depth. And the tears you swallowed to keep the peace? They didn't disappear. They crystallized into clarity. They shaped you. So let me ask you now, how many times have you held back your truth just to keep things smooth, just to avoid the discomfort, just to be accepted? And more importantly, what would happen if you didn't have to do that anymore? You're not alone in this. Share your story in the comments below if you feel called. Write it not for validation, but for liberation. Let your voice meet the ones who are finally ready to hear it. Because I promise you, they're here. Scorpio, in a world that teaches us to speak quickly, react faster, and defend ourselves before we're even attacked, your silence has been misunderstood. But not by me. And not by the higher currents of the universe that are moving in your favor this month. You see, silence when chosen with intention is not absence. It is presence. It is not weakness. It is alignment. Every time you chose not to respond to the chaos, every time you withheld your energy from people who could not meet you with care, you weren't retreating. You were meditating. You were becoming. You were, perhaps unknowingly, lighting the candle of your soul's inner sanctuary again and again. That's the sacred paradox most people miss. Silence isn't empty. It's full. It holds the echoes of everything unspoken, the wisdom that doesn't need noise to be known. It's where your intuition sharpened. It's where your spirit recalibrated. It's where your truth remained intact while the world around you asked you to dilute it. And now, in the divine timing of September's energetic closure, you're being asked to understand that this silence was not a pause in your growth, it was the container that allowed it to happen. In astrology, Scorpio is the sign of mystery, transformation, and depth. It's no coincidence that the High Priestess appears now in your spiritual spread. This card's silent, luminous, and deeply knowingy's not passive. She is power in stillness. She is intuition incarnate. And that is who you've been, even when the outside world didn't know how to receive you. The High Priestess doesn't fight. She doesn't chase. She waits, not because she's uncertain, but because she already knows. And like her, you've been gathering unseen strength, standing as a quiet witness to everything that tried to unmake you and failed. Your silence has spoken in ways words never could. And now, Scorpio, that inner stillness is becoming a bridge into something greater. You are stepping into a season where action will flow from alignment, not urgency. From clarity, not confusion. And from soul, not survival. But to receive the fullness of what's coming, you must also release what your silence has absorbed. This is where your healing becomes your offering. I encourage you to begin a simple practice this week. Each morning, take just 7 minutes to sit with yourself in complete silence. No music, no agenda, no pressure. Just be. Let the silence say what words cannot. And when you're ready, write down one thing you are willing to let go of: an old belief, a wound, a thought pattern that no longer matches who you're becoming. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about making room for the version of you that has already healed more than you realize. Because silence, Scorpio, is not only a space of reflection. It is also a sacred negotiation. Every time you chose not to react, you were rewriting the terms of your soul's energy. You were saying, "I will not give my fire to every spark." You were honoring your intuition over impulse. And that is what allowed your light to deepen rather than dim. So if you've been wondering whether anyone noticed, yes, it's been noticed. If you've been asking whether it mattered, yes, it mattered more than you know. And if you've been waiting for someone to say, "You were right to protect your peace," let this be that moment. Your silence was your strength. Your non-reaction was your revolution. And now, as your energy shifts toward new beginnings, the stillness within you becomes the foundation upon which everything sacred will rise. Scorpio, the silence you've kept, the restraint you've mastered, and the dignity with which you've held your truth were never wasted. And now, as your presence begins to take up more space without needing to justify itself, something extraordinary is happening, not just in you, but around you. Those who once laughed, dismissed, or trivialized your light are beginning to feel something shift. It's subtle at first. A tension in the air. A heaviness in the heart. But make no mistake, what they're feeling is not you seeking revenge or validation. It's the echo of energy returning to its source. It's karma finding its rhythm. It's truth finally outgrowing the place where it was hidden. Every time someone mocked your dream, questioned your sensitivity, or rolled their eyes at your depth, they weren't exposing your weakness. They were exposing their discomfort. Discomfort in the face of someone they could not control, someone they could not categorize. You see, people often ridicule what they do not understand, especially when what they're witnessing is power without noise, wisdom without performance, light that doesn't ask for permission. What they saw in you, Scorpio, was a reflection of something they hadn't yet found in themselves, and that reflection, at times, was unbearable. This is the energetic earthquake that has begun to rumble beneath the surface. Because the universe doesn't punish. It reveals. And when it reveals, it does so through mirrors, moments, relationships, encounters that force us to see what we've denied. Those who laughed at your softness are now being invited to confront their own hardened hearts. Those who underestimated your resilience are now watching you rise from ashes they thought would bury you. And for many of them, this awareness doesn't come with clarity. It comes with grief. Grief not because you've harmed them, but because they realize what they missed, what they pushed away, what they chose not to honor when it was still within reach. That's why, in the sacred meeting you were not physically present for but cosmically centered in, someone left in tears. Not because of guilt in the traditional sense, but because the light of truth has a way of dissolving illusions, and when that happens, the soul weeps not for punishment, but for the cost of blindness. From the lens of universal energy, this is the law of return in motion. What you've poured into the world through love, grace, and quiet endurance has not disappeared. It has simply been orbiting, waiting for the right moment to make its way back. And in September, it arrives not as applause or headlines, but as truth made visible. The law of attraction doesn't just bring to you what you want. It reveals what's aligned, what's no longer sustainable, and what has been silently drawing itself to the light of your becoming. So if you've ever felt like your presence made others uncomfortable, if you've seen people shrink from your joy, your depth, or your clarity, it's not because you were too much. It's because your light reflected their own distance from themselves. And the beauty is, you were never meant to dim for their comfort. You were meant to shine, even if it meant becoming a mirror that forced others to face their own hiding places. This month, Scorpio, you may witness subtle shifts. People reaching out. Situations resurfacing. Energy circling back. Let it come. But know this, your job is not to manage how others respond to your truth. Your job is to keep being who you've become. Because your light didn't break them, it revealed them. And that revelation is not your responsibility to carry. It's their opportunity to transform. Have you ever noticed your inner light unsettle others without you saying a word? Take a moment, if you feel called, to share in the comments below. Your story might just be the mirror someone else needs to finally see themselves. Scorpio, if you've been feeling a strange kind of discomfort lately, not the sharp sting of old wounds, but the quiet tension of outgrowing something familiar, not imagining it. You are shifting. The space that once felt safe, the people you once leaned on, the patterns you once repeated to survive. They no longer fit. It's not because you've become distant, ungrateful, or cold. It's because your soul has grown, and the energetic landscape that used to sustain you has reached its expiration date. Think of it like a favorite outfit from childhood. Once, it made you feel warm, known, held. But now, no matter how much you try to squeeze into it, it simply doesn't fit, not because the clothing shrank, but because you expanded. This is the essence of what September is asking of you. to stop shrinking into spaces your spirit has already outgrown. Astrologically, Pluto, your ruling planet and the celestial force of transformation, is moving in a way that brings long-buried truths to the surface. This isn't about chaos for the sake of drama. It's about evolution. Pluto is the alchemist of the zodiac, and you, Scorpio, are its living expression. You are being called to shed the version of yourself that was built for survival so you can step into the one designed for creation, for truth, for purpose. This isn't always graceful. You may notice resistance internally and externally. You might feel guilty for wanting more, restless in conversations that once thrilled you, or even confused by your own shifting desires. That's normal. Growth rarely announces itself with clarity at first. It moves quietly, like water wearing down stone, until one day you realize you're standing in a life that no longer reflects the depth of who you've become. This is a sacred moment. You are not losing connection, you are realigning. You are not abandoning others, you are honoring yourself. And the universe supports this kind of honesty. In fact, it expands in response to it. To make this shift more tangible, I invite you into 2 gentle self-healing practices this month. First, clear physical space. Go to your closet, your drawers, your shelves, and begin to release what no longer matches your frequency. Objects hold energy, and sometimes, without realizing it, we stay emotionally tied to the past through things we no longer need. Let go of what doesn't feel like you anymore. Make room for what's coming. Second, take a moment to reflect on how far you've already come. Write down 5 things, big or small, that you've overcome since the start of the year. This is not to prove anything to anyone. It's to remind yourself that you've already done the work. You've already crossed thresholds that once felt impossible. You deserve to stand in this new energy with confidence, not apology. So if conversations feel flat, if your surroundings feel too tight, if your old roles no longer make sense, it's not that something is wrong. It's that something is done. You don't belong in that version of your life anymore, and that's okay. You're not meant to squeeze back into it for the sake of comfort or familiarity. You're meant to step forward, even if your voice shakes, even if your path isn't fully formed yet. This is your emergence. Quiet, steady, powerful. You are not who you were, and that's the point. If you feel it too, if you know deep down you've stepped into a new energetic field, I invite you to speak it into existence. Comment below, "I've outgrown the old frequency." Let that be your declaration. Let that be your release. Let that be your rise. Scorpio, if this message found you at the edge of something, at the quiet end of a long chapter or the trembling beginning of something new, know that it was meant to. You didn't arrive here by chance. You arrived because your soul is ready to be reminded of what it already knows, that your past does not define your capacity to begin again. That the pain you carried was not a punishment, but a portal. And that forgiveness, the kind that truly liberates, was never about excusing what was done to you. It was about setting yourself free to walk forward, untethered and whole. Forgiveness isn't a return to what once broke you. It's a release of the energy that tied you to it. Just as we don't wear the same shoes we outgrew as children, we're not meant to carry resentment through doors meant for healing. And as the number 9 in numerology teaches us, September is the month of completion. Not in the sense that your journey ends here, but that a cycle does. One where you had to prove yourself, explain yourself, and shrink to fit places that never had room for your soul in the first place. Now, you are being asked to live different. Stop waiting for permission, for recognition, for someone else to tell you that you matter. Because you do. And your life is already the evidence. You are not the person others failed to understand. You are not the narrative they once imposed on you. You are something far more powerful, the living proof that resilience, when wrapped in quiet grace, becomes revelation. So I ask you gently but firmly, what would shift if you stopped needing the closure you never received? What would open if you believed, even just for today, that you are no longer seeking acceptance, but anchoring into your own light? Can you feel that? The pull towards something quieter but stronger? That's you, emerging from the fire not as ashes, but as gold. I want to take a moment to thank you. Truly. For sharing this space with me, for listening with your heart, and for walking your path with more courage than you often give yourself credit for. Your presence here matters. Every like, every comment, every subscription is more than support. It is a sacred affirmation that you are choosing growth over stagnation, and light over fear. You're helping us keep this space alive and meaningful at Miracle of the Sign, where messages like this are not just shared, but lived. If this video resonated with you, if you feel, deep in your core, that you've already outgrown the old frequency and are stepping into something new, declare it with me. Type 999 in the comments. Let that be your marker. Not to tell the world you're healed, but to show yourself that you're ready. Ready to walk into the month ahead with eyes clear, heart open, and spirit grounded. You are not waiting for the light anymore, Scorpio. You are the light. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You've already been appointed. Be your own becoming. Thank you for being here. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to Miracle of the Sign, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Because healing shared is healing multiplied. And trust me, what's coming next is nothing short of miraculous.